We're going to talk about the unchanging principles of parenting. There was somebody that was doing some research one time, and they were trying to figure out what type of jobs gave people the most burnout. And how many of you ever felt burnt out in your job before, and it's something you're doing? I think we probably all have. And they were doing some research, and they discovered that there was a commonality between jobs where people said that they were more burnt out and jobs that people said that they really weren't burnt out. And here was the factor right here. Is they noticed that the jobs where people were most likely to get burnt out were jobs that had to do with you were around people a lot. There was a great relational element, so things like caregivers and teachers and counselors, and things like that. Those people tended to kind of be burn out a little bit more than say like maybe a truck driver who is not around people all the time. And I was corresponding over email with BJ Ware, who is stationed in Seoul, Korea. Actually, the largest church in the world is in Seoul, Korea, and I was telling him about it. I said, hey, you need to go check it out. 850,000 people go to one church. Can you imagine that? We wouldn't be able to hold all that people in the city. I mean, that's a lot of folks. And I remember hearing the pastor of that church talk, and he said one time in a conference, he was Korean, he's like, I love God. I'm trying to do a Korean accent. I can't do it, but I love the church, but I don't like people at all. And he was saying, I get burnt out because of all the people, and that tends to happen. But what's so weird about that is the one-to-one thing, the people thing, the relationship thing is really the most important thing that we've got going for us as humans, and it's huge. And sometimes we kind of trip up in it, and we need a lot of help with it. And there's nothing more important than the issue of parenting, and that is a people thing. It's a one-to-one thing, and we can really kind of sometimes not navigate that well, and we need some help with it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about 3 unchanging principles of parenting, and ironically, these actually can relate to any type of relationship, not just parenting, but specifically parenting. Now, one of the things that we have noticed, and you guys have probably noticed over the years, is there's a lot of books, there's a lot of theories about how to raise kids. And it changes a lot. And you can go back in time and you can see there's a block of period where people said, this is the way you should do it. Then there was a change and there was a block of period where people said, this is the way you should do it. Then the experts said, this is the way you should do it. And it's changed dramatically. And I found in the last decade of being a parent that I've even changed a lot in the way that I've done it. Let me give you an example. When Christian was born 8 years ago, when we brought him home from the hospital, if you could have seen the way that we were, you would have cracked up. I remember we had these little foam triangles that were like these nice foam triangles with little like animals on it or something like that. And it had Velcro that you could make it a different measure. And of course the thing is the baby should lay on the side or on the back, but not on the tummy, or something like that. It may have changed since then, I don't know. But the thing was to lay the baby on the side. Remember, we put the triangles like you prop the wheels of a truck or something. It was like we put the little foam blocks so that Christian would be perfect at the, 43-degree angle perfectly. It was just, perfect. And then we had this little thing called a boppy, which is like basically a horseshoe, a foam rubber horseshoe. The baby sits in, and it's supposed to just keep him perfect so that, there's nothing moves. It was amazing. We were just perfect with all this stuff. It had to be exactly there and perfect. And then I also remember with his little pacifier, that if the pacifier, for whatever reason, would come out of his mouth and plop to the floor, we'd grab it up off the floor, take it in the kitchen, boil some water, put the pacifier in there to kill all the germs, and then we'd have to get it to a certain temperature to get it. And so boy would be in his mouth, and we were insanely anal retentive. It was absolutely horrible, as most first parents are. In fact, I remember the first day that we brought him home from the hospital, and he just cried. We were sure that he was crying more than we thought. That he should have been crying. And we took a bath. We got in the car, we took him out, we said, look, tech support, help, something's wrong, and the doctor was saying, no, that baby's crying. It's normal, it happens, and we were freaky. So that's the way I was. But then by the time we got to Karis, she was born a few years ago, it's like the triangles were nowhere to be found. We didn't have triangles, we just plopped her there in the crib, and I would barely even hear her cry at night when she woke up. It was crazy, And then you take it, you just throw over your shoulder, and the pacifier falls on the floor. It's like, 5-second rule, just plop it back in there, Dog comes along, licks it off, cleans it, put it back in there. No, that's a joke, I didn't really do that. You know, I don't actually have a dog, but I thought that would be funny. So things have changed. And I have changed. But what I'm going to give you today, I'm going to give you 3 things that have not changed. And they will not change. And they're things that you can do to get relationships right, especially with kids. And we're going to go to the book of Mark, chapter 10. And we're going to start in verse 13. And here's what it says right here. People were bringing little children to Jesus to have him touch them. But the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, put his hands on them, and he blessed them. Number 1 principle that you need to get, and we can find from here, is number 1, write it in your notes, loving touch. Loving touch. Verse 13 says, people were bringing little children to Jesus to have him, what? Touch them. Why were they bringing the kids to have Jesus touch? Well, the principle is this: there is power in loving, appropriate touch. There's an experiment that Frederick II, who lived in the 13th century, did. And this sounds kind of cruel, but I don't know, I guess the 13th century was pretty dark. But here's what he did. He wanted to do an experiment. He wanted to see that if a baby from birth was not taught any specific language, what language would they automatically learn? So he got 15 babies somehow and brought them into this experiment. He hired 15 ladies to come in and to make sure that the babies were fed, but they were told not to give them care. They were told to not do a typical mother thing because they wanted to just make it as placid as they could. Well, this experiment didn't work because within 1 year, every single one of the babies died. Why did they die? It's because they did not have the loving touch that a child needs to have to sustain him. Mark chapter 6, verse 56 says this. And speaking of Jesus, it says, whenever he went into villages, towns, or countrysides, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edges of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. And I know that this is talking about Jesus, and I know it's in the context of Jesus, but every time in the New Testament, there's about 20 of them, where it talks about touch, and it talks about Jesus, every single one of those times had to do with healing. There is power in a loving touch. Haptomehi is the Greek word for that touch, and it says to attach oneself to embrace, to touch. Now here's the thing that's going on, I think, is we kind of live in a world right now where we're a little bit freaked out about touch. And we're afraid of, we've heard so much about inappropriate touch that we're freaked out about it. And then a lot of us just have insecurities on us that make us to where we don't want to, my space. This is my space. Don't come near. And the other day I was having lunch with my brother-in-law, and we were sitting at a Chinese restaurant. We were right in the corner booth, and there was a woman that came up, and it was hilarious. She came up and she was holding a baby, and she walked right up to David. He was sitting right there. He walked right like this, and we thought, oh my gosh, David's about to get another kid. And it looked like she was giving, and then she kind of like backed into the seat like that. And we were both, both of us were like that. And we talked about later, and it's like, why were we both freaked out? It's because somebody invaded our space. And we're a little bit freaked out about that thing right now.